paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
The Death Tour is the hardest tour there is in sports.
If you want to be a wrestler, the Death Tour is a definite way to prove to yourself and to others that you have what it takes. Problem is, to get there, it's not easy.
There's Doug Demi blocking the road.
Said he'd been there till 2 o'clock this morning.
When wrestling does arrive to these very remote, isolated indigenous communities,
Just getting there now.
it's like WrestleMania, in the reservation.
You got to perform every night. After 3 weeks of it, a couple of them, all of them, will crack.
Y'all ready?
And we are off.
No alcohol, no drugs. Do not break those rules.
You're probably not going to have cell service up there, so how will you keep in touch?
Smoke signals.
But way up north where it's really remote, people feel hopeless.
Sometimes you can kind of feel that dark energy in the communities.
Tony Condello, who's been running these tours, he says this is the most deaths he's had on any tour.
So all we can do is give them the best show we possibly can.
Wrestling has always been a source of healing and like light in my life.
Fire them up tonight. Let's go.
But every time we get in the ring, we get that crowd to react. That's what I live for.
If anybody that comes to this trip here, they can wrestle anywhere in the world.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with directors Stefan Peterson and Sonia Ballantyne all about their 2024 documentary, The Death Tour. The film recently played at the Slamdance Film Festival. It is a documentary all about a group of wrestlers that go through some pretty remote areas of Canada. May sound like an odd subject, but it is a really compelling documentary. Definitely check that out, and I hope you enjoy this interview.
Tell me how you got interested in filmmaking and how you know each other.
I got into filmmaking when I was 12. My grandpa, my mom's side, was like an avid video editor and was always editing home videos. So he gave me the bug, and every summer I'd make little short films with him, and then ended up going to school for media studies and then working my way up as a PA. And 15 years later, here I am now, still not saying no to PA jobs, depending on if it's for the right person, but been working in the nonfiction space for about 15 years and directing for maybe the last 10. So I've directed a lot of TV, again, always unscripted stuff, but this is a project that I've been chipping away at slowly for 8 years now. Stumbled upon the tour myself. I was not a wrestling fan growing up, but stumbled upon it and I just saw how I discovered the wonderful world of wrestling and saw this particular tour while I was in one of these communities on another project. And that's when I just saw how the crowds in these communities responded to these wrestlers in this tour. I learned about the tour's lore but really became fascinated by kind of this world of indie wrestling and watching all these really inspiring people of all walks of life, really just using wrestling as just how wrestling helped them out of a hole, helped them overcome various challenges in their life. And it was really inspiring. So that's what got me really interested in wrestling and then out on this tour. And then I actually went on the tour for a couple of days and I really saw that this film was about far more than just wrestling. It was about the relationship that this tour in particular and Tony Condello, and he's been going to these towns for 50 years now. And when I saw the relationship between the tour and the wrestlers and these communities, I realized that there was a far bigger story here. And that's when we were looking for a filmmaker from the area. And then turns out, and then we met Sonia, and she was the best candidate. And it was also like not only super cool, but a massive wrestling historian. So there you go.
Yeah, I was a writer first and foremost. I've been writing since I was a little girl. One of my first jobs was writing stories for friends where they got to marry Justin Timberlake if they wanted to. So stuff like that was how I got my foot in the door, paid writing. Been a wrestling fan since I was a baby, and was like initially not going to come on the project because I wanted to focus on writing specifically because I had just gotten into TV writing, mostly children's work right now. But I was really impressed by Steph's commitment to the story because when he approached me initially, I was worried it was just going to be the standard wrestling documentary about his retrospective historical look at the tour. And I was like, but then he was like saying that he wanted to focus on the backgrounds of the wrestlers and the communities that we visited. So I was really taken in, and I think that was about 3 years ago. And so it's been a fun trip so far.
It's funny, when I was watching the documentary the other night, my wife was like, is this Ice Road Truckers? And I had no idea, Steph, that you had worked on Ice Road Truckers. That's amazing.
I did, yes. It taught me a lot. Doing Ice Road Truckers is one of the toughest shows I did. For one, it's the same environment. It's the same place. But I was familiar with what traveling along the ice roads was going to be like. But I really came up doing a lot of those Dangerous Jobs shows for the Discovery Channel, where you're these very small crews who are trying to find story, and your very small crews running sound and cameras looking for the stories. For doing a film like this, that was very character driven and action driven, where you're not going in with any kind of plan other than just roll with the punches. A lot of that kind of really helped me do this.
So when you get this idea of, hey, I want to do this documentary about these wrestlers and about this tour, what do they think when you approach them with that idea?
They were pretty open to it. Started just speaking to alumni that I could find online, and they all said the same thing. The tour was difficult, but amazing. It really helped me. Tony is a legend. And then the third thing was, three things actually. And the third was that they tell me their story and how wrestling really changed their lives. So all of them were very open to being filmed. These wrestlers, these men and women are all natural storytellers. They were all very open to being a part of this project. So that was very easy. And then the co-creator of this with me, Joe Kitson, and I flew early on, a good friend of mine from school. We decided, let's do this project. And so we flew out on points to visit Tony and met him at a cafe and just pitched the story to him. And he was open to it. He was like, am I going to make a lot of money off this? We're like, it's a Canadian documentary. Probably not. They're not known for, but who knows? And so it took us a long time. To his credit, he allowed us to string him along for the years it took to get it done. And I think he's happy now. Yeah.
Seeing him happy must be a rare occasion.
Yes.
Yes.
I love every single character that's in this film. And I know that they're not characters, they're real people, but every single person brings so much to the discussion. It must have been such a gift for you to be able to have these people open up to you and share their stories.
I was nervous initially because wrestling was always about all wrestlers have a public persona that they put on. That's like their mask, like their armor. And I remember initially being worried with Steph, especially. I tell him how are we going to get them to open up so that, because they do often have show faces. They know exactly how they want to be portrayed and such like that. And so I think it was because we approached them with such a reverence for what they did that they were way more open to opening up to us in a way they might not have opened up for others. And I think it was also telling that we went on the tour with them as well, even though there was some times where we got to go and we got to stay in beds while the wrestlers didn't. But I'm like, we're going to be lugging these cameras around. I want a bed at least once on this trip. But it was really cool, especially because Steph was the person who bought in Sarah, and I was the person who bought in Des and Sage. And just once we got the core group together, it felt right, ultimately. There was, I don't know, my favorite band, U2, calls it like when God comes into the room. That's what it felt like, where it felt right. And even when we hit challenges on the road or anything, everything just felt like it was supposed to be natural. I don't know. I feel like unfair because we got so lucky, even though like, we got so lucky with the characters and how willing they were to talk to us. And so I think we all became really good friends as well, which I know you're not supposed to with your documentary, but it was hard not to become friends with such great people.
At least they're not like criminals or murderers or somebody awful that you don't want to become friends with. Because, yeah, they all seem so genuine. At the end of the day, they just seem like they all wear their heart on their sleeves.
Yes, they do. And it was wild. We were following 10 of them, and each one was worthy of their own film, honestly. We just committed to the ones that we'd really had a relationship before the trip. Before the trip had set out, a lot of like Tony's group was being put together the month leading up to the trip, and some of which he had booked well in advance. Others were booked last minute. And our process going into it to not go in totally blind was to kind of precast them almost, talk to them, meet them, go visit them at a time at home, like all that stuff at home that we shot with them was shot before the trip. And by the time we get there, a lot of other great guys were there too, but we'd already sort of, the ball had started rolling. We committed to a few of the cast. All that to say that everyone on the cast was pretty amazing, and they all wore their heart on their sleeve. It's got to be a wrestling thing. I don't know what Sonia will be able to tell you that. She's the expert. But what I can say too is that when you're there for 15 days straight and you're like sleeping in the same rooms as them and you're eating with them, having breakfast with them, at a certain point, like the walls come down because the trip's hard enough as is. And when you're embedded with your cast, you get the opportunity to really forge a great relationship with them. They knew we were there. We weren't pulling any low blows or anything. We're trying to make anything like that.
How many people were in your crew? How many people were on this tour with you?
We were 6. Me, Sonia, our director of photography, Van Royko, our sound engineer, Emery Murchison, our unit like supervising producer, Joe Kitson, and our driver, Curtis Williamson. And so we were 6, a driver. We had 2 vehicles, a chase vehicle, and SUV that could splinter off and go anywhere they went. And then we had a bigger truck, cube truck almost, in the back with all of we had a fair amount of equipment and all our food and sleeping gear and emergency stuff too.
Do you mind if I ask, how did you get this funded? Because that sounds like a lot of equipment and a lot of expense.
Our producer, Stacy Tannenbaum and Sergio Kirby will better be able to understand that. And that's part of what took many years. But we have a lot of Canadian broadcasters on board, which helped us apply for a number of grants and funds that helped put this together. But it was through the support of our many broadcasters. We have APTN, CBC, various CBC branches, as well as the Fight Network. It took a while to put everything together. But yeah, that's why. Because we went up with a lot of people out of gear.
When the wrestlers stop at a particular place, it took me a little while to realize that it feels like they would give speeches to the kids that were there to see them. Did that happen every single stop? And how did they determine who was going to talk?
We didn't get into this part of the documentary, but Tony, when he originally got the territory of Northern Manitoba, was asked to go up there by this Indigenous politician named Phil Fontaine. And Phil Fontaine said that, okay, you could go up there, but leave the women alone. Don't bother the kids. And I want you to do school talks that talk about stay away from drugs, stay in school, that sort of thing. And so that's where initially it came from, the paying it forward for the territory that Phil awarded Tony. And so the talks are mostly just about to show the kids, especially in the case of Sage, a little more personal bits about them, because we also had Acid talk a lot on those trips too, just because of his past with drug abuse. And I don't know, I think that the little kids really loved it too, just to see them again. And it also added as a little bit of promo for the wrestling event if it happened before other wrestling events. And so it was really cool just to see them open up like that, just because a lot of the issues that Sage or Massive were talking about were things that the kids themselves were experiencing. And so it like often gave them a bit of, oh, this person is a lot like me. And so I think it was specifically powerful with somebody like Sage, who was Indigenous, just because it was just really compelling to see how the kids reacted to her. And so, yeah, the talks were really, for lack of a better word, I enjoyed them. I wouldn't say they were fun to talk about the bad side of their experiences, but it was just really cool to see how the kids reacted to them.
It almost felt like a therapy. It almost felt like every single time they were having like a group share.
Yeah, we called them like in the culture, in Cree culture, we call them sharing circles. And so it was very therapeutic, 'cause especially with the children being able to see somebody who looks like their aunt or their mother, just talking about her own experiences. And then she also does this cool job as a wrestler. And so, at least with me as an Indigenous kid who grew up on the res, I wanted to see people like Sage in jobs that I wanted. And to see her as a wrestler, these kids are probably really overwhelmed with, hey, if she can do that, so can I, because I had that type of hero when I was young that I needed. And so I think it's pretty cool that Tony always comes across as gruff, but he also, I think he is, we call them shooms in our culture. It means grandfather. And he's rough on the outside, but he's marshmallowy on the inside, because he doesn't really have to do these anymore, but he does them just because, I don't know, I guess it feels good for him also. And yeah, Tony is a man of mystery to me.
Those moments of more pathos, like learning of all of the suicides that were happening on the reservations that they're going through, was that something that just happened while you were doing this? Or was that something that you wanted to specifically bring up as you were setting out on this journey?
Tony had told us before that's when they do happen on the reserve, even if they're not suicides, the community will shut down to mourn. But during this trip, there would be a death in the community we were in. Then there would be another in the community that we were heading to. And then there would be another in the community we could have gone back to have another show. And so we were not stuck, we had a great time there, but we were basically, we had to stay put in one place for a very long time. People wanted to get moving. That was the thing that was. And so forcing us to stay put for so long ended up leading to a lot of really good moments. Not that we planned it or anything, but the scene with Sage dancing when she was powwow dancing in the hall, and when the wrestlers were feeding the dogs, talking to the kids. I don't know. It was just like luck in terms of being able to just get to know our characters a little bit more. Because I think if we hadn't had that moment where all of us were just like staying put in one place, I don't think we would have gotten as close as we did to the other wrestlers. But I think Steph can talk a little bit about that as well.
I was definitely aware that this is an epidemic that is like the suicide epidemic across many of these communities across Canada and northern Canada. I certainly did not expect it to impact the tour the way it did. But when we started hearing of it impacting our schedule with the team, with Sonia, we spoke, and it was pretty clear off the top that this was not an angle or a story we were hoping to exploit. Not, you don't want to go out to the community and bother anybody. We were just closing in on ourselves, staying put, respecting the community's time of mourning, and we didn't want to nose around or anything. So that's why the film just turns in, look upon ourselves. And we had a lot of the cast in the film are from similar communities who have experienced that. So they were able to tell us, like, this is what's going on. This is how it feels, where we've been impacted by deaths in our own communities as well. But no, we did not anticipate that or expect that to happen at all. It was eye-opening for some of us and devastating for everybody.
Yeah, and just so you know, it didn't feel exploitative at all. It feels like a very respectful documentary. Even if it just focused solely on the wrestling, there was so much respect there. And then when it branches off and becomes a little bit different, still very respectful.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And also, that was a question in the writing that Sonia and I had to deal with, was like, how much do we not mention it? Do we pretend it didn't happen? How do we broach it without exploiting it, without glossing over it either? Because that'd be even worse, in our opinion.
It was something that I was really good at stuff, and I decided on, just because the way we portrayed it was the way the wrestlers perceived it, and as it was happening. And because a lot of them hadn't ever been to reserve before, like the ones who had been on the tour before knew the situation, but even then they were saying that they hadn't been this impacted before. I'm Indigenous, and I've always hated how the media has portrayed, like, the only time our homes are on the TV is when, like, somebody's murdered or somebody dies. And so when this was happening, I was like, Steph, why don't we just focus on like how it's impacting the wrestlers rather than go out there to try and bother people during their grief. And so it was really cool to do that and just be able to, because I was initially very worried about, okay, we're not going to go out there and try and like sensationalize anything. And I was really glad that was Steph's opinion as well.
Was Flame Dance, was that your premiere?
Yes.
How was that for you?
Very overwhelming in a good way. I was very happy just because we had shown the film a few times to the wrestlers to get their opinion, such like that. And Steph and I had seen different cuts of it, but to finally see it completed and in front of an audience and having people react to it, because I was initially very worried about how wrestling fans were going to react to it, because there's a very specific type of wrestling documentary that's accepted in the community. And having people be so overwhelmed by the joy we portray in it, as well as the pathos, was so great for me. And plus, Tony saying it was the best film he had ever seen. I was like, just so amused by that, because I was like, how many films have you seen, Tony? But it was so cool to hear him say that and to have Jericho really enjoy the film as well. And it was just very cool. And I'm happy to see how it's being perceived. So yeah, it was pretty cool for me.
It was equally overwhelming for myself. The day of the premiere was an absolute whirlwind. That was a mix of nerves and elation. And then it was over as fast as it came. And then we're still coming down from it. We got back from Park City. I got back from Park City about 24 hours ago and get back into the routine at home. And it was wild. And just to add to or continue what Sonia was saying about, it was well received by the wrestling community, which is super important to me going into this, because it was important to do a balancing act, whereas it would be accepted and respectful of the wrestling community that had always been like so behind this and so supportive of it going into it, while also being accessible to outsiders like myself who knew nothing about wrestling but after scratching the surface of it and getting to know the characters and the behind the scenes would become as in awe of the craft as I have become. Yeah, it was very validating to know that it appealed to both the wrestling fans who showed up at the screening as well as others. And we got a couple good laughs too. So that was always nice. But it's a bit of a heavy film, but we got a few pops, as the wrestlers like to say.
So what's next for the movie and for you two?
For the movie, we are hoping to continue a bit of a festival circuit this spring and summer. There's going to be a small theatrical window in Canada in the summer. And then our website will have more. And then our website will have all the information. Really looking into is bringing this film back to the communities. We're trying to find the best way to do it, because these communities, as you may remember from the film, are only accessible by road in the winters. And so we're trying to figure out a way on like how to join Tony's tour maybe again and bring the film back, or try to find. So that's the next big puzzle question. Is it's important we bring this back up there. So trying to figure out the best way to do it and when. Our Instagram handles are DeathTourDoc or DeathTourDoc.com, I believe.
Thank you so much. It was so great talking with both of you. I really appreciate this.
Oh, thank you.
Mike, thanks a lot for taking the time. Thanks for watching the film.